On today's show, we are beginning our player previews for the 2023 season with the Mets catchers. Is Francisco Alvarez going to be a big contributor this year, and when will that happen? How much production will the Mets get from Omar Narváez and Tomas Nido in their platoon to start the season? We're going to discuss all of it on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also follow some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor, where I'm also hosting the Who's Better Baseball podcast. And today's show is very interesting when it comes to the Mets because we are discussing divisions. Which division will be better this year? Which division won more? The NL East or the NL West? It's very nitty-gritty to look down at each team, the win total projection to see how to break out. So make sure you check that out. If you want to look at over-under win totals, go to FanDuel. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment matter more by visiting FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Now, player previews for the upcoming season. Setting expectations is what we have called this series since last year, where I look at the projection models at FanGraphs and I give my take on them. Do I expect the player to outperform projections or to maybe do worse than what the projections are saying? Last year, for example, I thought that Jeff McNeil and even Francisco Lindor were going to far exceed their projections, and both of those players ultimately did that. You know, maybe I was a little bit too high on a Dominic Smith last year or a Robinson Cano, thinking the Mets might actually get anything when it came to production from those guys. So it's not an exact science, but it's always good to see what the stats are telling us, what the analytics community believes, and then judging it based on our own eye tests and what we feel about these players. So for a Friday Farm Report, I thought it would be great to start this series with Francisco Alvarez because I was planning on discussing him a little bit anyway. So I wanted to see, first of all, how much the projection models actually think he's going to play this year. Zips is the only model that does not take into account depth chart. You can look at, there's the Zips depth chart projection, which obviously does take that into account. There's FanGraphs depth chart, the BAT, the X, the BAT, ATC, Steamer, all of these different projection models that you can find if you go to a player's FanGraphs page and look under their stats. They're all lit up in green for us to get us ready for the upcoming season, see what these guys are supposed to do. Look at the games played across the board. The lowest is 32 and the highest is 45. Now, the only model that has him playing more is the just plain Zips projection, which again does not take into account his spot on the depth chart. So that has him playing 119 games. So let's start with what the consensus is on Francisco Alvarez. An average between 218 and 232, an on-base percentage between 308 and 321, a slugging percentage between 392 and 411. Now, I look at his minor league career, and I think they're low on Alvarez offensively because, look at each stop for him. Obviously, you can maybe throw out the rookie ball stats and even low A where he was Babe Ruth hitting 417. But, in 2021 in high A, when he was still adjusting, he hit 247. When he was adjusting to AAA, he hit 234. But then you look at the on-base percentage in those two stops. 351 in high A, 382 in AAA. The largest, sample size where I felt like Alvarez was ready for the spot he was in, the promotion that he got to, was when he started the year in AA this past season, where he really had, even though it was only 67 games, it was a lead up from spring training into that assignment, and he was able to ride out some waves, and ultimately he had 277 with a 368 on base and a 553 slugging. Also the slugging side, he has never slugged below 443, and that's always been more a smaller sample size. I think with a larger sample size, he generally is going to slug over 500. So I'm looking at slugging percentages in these projection models of 394, 392. I don't believe that's accurate. If Alvarez gets at bats, I think he is going to slug more than they're giving him credit. I think he is going to hit for a little bit of a higher average, and he has drawn walks at every stop. I mean, his walk rate is always over 12%. Except for, his first stint in rookie ball at 11.3. I mean, when he got to AAA last year, he walked at a 17% clip. They were being careful with him, and he started to be really patient and take those walks. So I think the on-base percentage will be better. I think that the average could be better. I think the slug could be better. I think across the board, he can be a better offensive player than they're giving him credit. But even if he is what they're saying, he's going to be the best offensive catcher that the Mets have this year, bar none. Now, the Zips model is interesting because this is a 500 plate appearance sample. They have him walking at an 11% clip, striking out at a 28% clip, which I think both of those things can be true. They have him hitting 220, getting on base at a 318 clip, and slugging at a 411 clip for a 112 WRC plus. So WRC plus, again, measures hitters based on a league average of 100, 12% better than a league average hitter as a catcher. That is great. And I think league average for a catcher, honestly, I don't have it in front of me, but from my knowledge base, I'm pretty sure you're lucky if you get a catcher over 80% or over 80, when it comes to WRC plus. Now, the big thing that this Zips projection model has is 21 home runs for Francisco Alvarez. The Mets got 20 home runs for the catcher position. You'd be thrilled. So that is the potential there. They have him as a 3-win player in 119 games. That's really good. That is a really good catcher. So you look at Narvaez and Nido. We're going to really dive into them in the last segment today. But neither one of them is really projected to be more than potentially a 2-win player. Alvarez, on the other hand, if he was able to get that run, could be that good. Now, the question is, when do we see Francisco Alvarez? Does he play the 30 to 45 games that most models have him at? Or could he get to an 80, 90 game sample this year? Is there, 40 games at DH for him and 50 at catcher? How much run is this guy going to get? Can he force his way onto the roster? That's what we're going to discuss next. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Built Bar. We just got through the holidays, and this is the time of year where people are trying to lose some weight. If that is you, or if you just want a delicious snack that you can feel a little bit better about, look at Built Bar. This is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. What makes Built Bars so amazing is they all come covered in that 100% real chocolate with some unbelievable flavors, so you can always change it up, whether you're feeling some churro, peanut butter brownie, the coconut almond. They got it all at Built.com, and they only come with 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, while you're getting a whopping 17 grams of protein. The best part, you no longer have to wait for a box at Built.com. While it's great to go there, you can order your mixed boxes, try a bunch of different flavors, get it shipped right to you. An amazing way to try some Built Bars. Maybe you're listening to this now, like, man, I would love a Built Bar right now. Here's what you can do. You can go to Walmart. You can go to Sam's Club. At Walmart, go to the pharmacy section. You can pick up a 4-bar box of the cookies and cream, the double chocolate, the coconut puffs. Or if you're by Sam's Club, run in, grab a 13-bar box of their hit flavors, the brownie batter or the churro. You can thank me later. Go to your local store and buy Built Bars today. When will Francisco Alvarez be the starting catcher on the New York Mets? I did a full show about this last month, so you can check that out where I really dive deep into it. But I do want to touch base on it again, looking at these projection models, because, again, I think it's a little bit low. I think we're going to see more of Alvarez, but I also can understand when you bring in Omar Narváez, when you have Tomas Nido, when you have a veteran pitching staff, there could be a sense of, I don't want to call it complacency, but you might just get to that point where, Verlander and Scherzer are healthy and Senga's going well and the rotation's carrying you and you're getting enough from your lineup and you're winning games. If the Mets are really successful early in the season, they might not want to mess things up. And if that's the case, his path to being the starting catcher on the Mets might take some time, but then there's always that avenue of the DH spot. So then it hinges on a couple of things. It hinges on, for one, do they get any offensive production from Narvaez and Nido? And we're going to discuss them next segment. Two, what are they getting from Daniel Vogelback? And three, who else on the roster is filling in at the DH spot? Is Darren Ruff still on the team? How's Tommy Pham hitting? Has Mark Vientos or Brett Beatty grab some at-bats? If Beatty's playing some third base, and apparently, according to Francisco Lindor, he looks great out there. Maybe that's going to be the show next week, looking at the third baseman and seeing how Beatty, maybe we'll do setting expectations for Beatty and Vientos next farm report. But, if those guys are grabbing some DH at-bats, or if, Beatty has supplanted Escobar and now Escobar is the team's DH, there might not be that avenue for an Alvarez, and the Mets might be okay with the idea of, look, it's a 21-year-old catching prospect. Let's not mess him up. Let's keep him in Syracuse. Let's keep him developing. With that said, if Francisco Alvarez is in Syracuse and he's hitting like he has in Double-A when he got rolling like he did in that last month at Syracuse, if he's walking at a 14% clip because pitchers in that league don't want to attack him, if he's getting on base, at a 380 clip and he is slugging over 500, he's piling up home runs and you're getting nothing offensively, there's going to be that push to say, you know what, let's call on Alvarez. So I don't believe it's going to happen early. Generally, it could be a confluence of events where Alvarez is hitting and Tomas Nido just went down. He got hit in the wrist. He's going to be on the IL for 2 weeks. And you call up Alvarez and you say, all right, we're going to get you a day at DH a week. You're going to platoon with Vogie at DH. You're going to grab some time from Narvaez and have a little bit of a split going there. You're going to learn from the fellow Venezuelan catcher. And by the end of the season, he's your guy. My personal projection for Francisco Alvarez going into this season, I think that he might not get enough run to eclipse 20 home runs, but I think he's going to surpass 10 pretty comfortably, and I think he might make a push for 15. I don't think he's going to hit for the highest of averages, but I think he'll get on base at a better clip than they're projecting. I think 330, 340 is in the cards for him, and I don't know if he's going to slug over 500 as a rookie, but I do think that he's going to slug well past 400, maybe veering closer to 450, and with that be a very, very productive catcher or DH complement that this team is going to need. And when you get to October, I don't know if it's a hot take or not, but I think Francisco Alvarez is going to be catching game one of the playoffs next year. I do believe that he's going to ascend and grab that job. I think that the pathway is there for him. I don't think that Narvaez on a deal with was it a club option? I can't even remember the exact. I know it's a mutual option. We'll get to that in the next segment when we discuss Narvaez and Nido. But those catchers on 2-year deals at the most are not blocking Tomas Nido. Tomas Nido's not blocking Tomas Nido. Nido and Narvaez are not blocking Alvarez. If he is doing what he's supposed to, playing up to his potential in AAA, he's going to force the Mets' hand, and I think we all certainly hope that he does. Now, next, we'll go into the incumbents. What are Narvaez and Nido going to do? We're going to get to that, but first, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is upon us. Now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, it's secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to the spread to point scores to three-pointers drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. Personally, I'm also already looking towards MLB futures. There you can find odds on MVP, Cy Young, Rookie of the Year. I keep telling you, Kodai Senga plus 750. I jump on that one. Don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment matter more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Now we move over to Omar Narváez and Tomas Nido. Now Narváez, his peak offensively came in 2018 and 2019, 2 seasons where his WRC plus was over 120. So that means, again, 20% better than your league average hitter for a catcher. That's remarkable. And in those seasons, we saw him hit over 270. So he was really good. He actually had a 3-year span where he hit over 275 each year and got on base at a 350 clip each year. His best season in Seattle, 2019 juice ball season, he hit 22 home runs, scored 63, drove in 55, struck out less than 20% of the time, walked 9.8% of the time, slugged 460. That has not been the case the last 2 seasons in Milwaukee, okay? 2021, he was a league average hitter, 266 average, 342 on base, 402 slugging, 11 homers, 100 WRC WRC plus, so exactly league average. And then this past year, 84 games played, 206 hitter, 292 on base, 305 slugging. That's paltry. 71 WRC plus, 4 home runs. Projection models, what do they believe the Mets will get here? The low end has him as a 83 WRC plus. The high end is 105. The slash line ranges 219 for the low on the average, all the way up to 248. The on-base percentage, it's between 300 and 328. The slug is 317 to 369. You might be asking, why again did the Mets go out of their way to sign Omar Narváez? I think it really was the mentorship he brings. You know, the most home runs that he's projected to hit is 8. So don't expect much from Omar Narváez offensively. I think that it's good to have a more natural platoon, to have a lefty and a righty, and both of them are great defensive catchers. So early on in the season, I'm fine with it. These are going to be the worst bats in your lineup, and around them, you have 8 strong bats for the most part. So it's okay, but I don't think you're going to get above average production. If I had to guess, I'd certainly lean more towards the miles to have him being a below average hitter than an above average hitter. I just don't look at Omar Narváez, and look at his profile at 31 years old and think, okay, well, there's a lot more left in the tank here. I think it's his job to command this pitching staff. It's his job to mentor the young catcher and, get the young catcher to replace him and to be, ready to take on that task. I really believe that's why he's here. Now, at his peak when it comes to F4, it's a 2.1 F4. But all the models have him between 1.9 and 2.1. Last year, his F4 was 1.1. 2021 was 2.8, which was actually a career high because he's gotten better defensively as he's gotten worse offensively. So, again, I don't hate the signing by any stretch, and the more I've seen him now be like stapled to Alvarez to start spring, it starts to make more and more sense. But if you're thinking that Narváez is this massive upgrade over James McCann, I think it's more replacing what McCann brought with a player that bats left-handed that you have a little tiny bit more hope of some upside with, but really it's all about trying to get Alvarez to a point by the end of the season where he is your starting catcher. Now, when it comes to Tomas Nido, he just got a nice, team-friendly contract to lock up his last couple years of arbitration. I think that the Mets are in an interesting spot because you don't necessarily want to carry 3 catchers. And he doesn't have options, but you're not going to DFA Nido. So you're in a weird place where we'll see how things ultimately break out. But Nido could get traded. You could get to a point where you say, all right, Alvarez has shown us enough. Maybe one of the catchers is on the IL, or you have a position player that's on the IL, and once whoever that player is needs to come back, you have to make a decision. And Nido's a guy that you could trade because a lot of teams will value him defensively. And personally, I loved the idea of Nido sticking around. And at one point in 2019, I proclaimed him the backup catcher of the future, which is a backhanded compliment, but I really meant it as a compliment in the sense that I thought he could stick around for a long time and be a really good defensive catcher for the Mets. And I still believe that to be the case. But with Narváez and that mentorship of Alvarez, I just think that there is a good chance that, Nido could find himself on the outside looking in by the end of the season. And you look at the offensive numbers, I mean, his best season was 2020. It was a 26 plate appearance sample size. Can't take much from it. For his career, he's a 220 hitter with a 257 on base and a 323 slugging. Has not provided much. Last year, I thought he had good moments, though. He did drive eight. He did, drive eight. Maybe I was looking at the 28 runs he drove in, and I got a little confused there. Words getting jumbled. Last show of the week. Sorry, people. But again, I thought that we saw some good progress from Nido last year, even though the numbers overall are still pretty bad. 239 average, 276 on base, 324 slug, 74 WRC plus. But I like Nido a lot as a player, and I think ultimately as a backup catcher, he's one of the best in baseball because of how good he is behind the dish and how much pitchers really value throwing to him. I mean, that's something that we hear. Everyone loves to throw to Tomas Nido. And the one other element this, versus left-handed pitching last year, he did hit 259, a little bit better. I think this year he's going to get even more at-bats, more force-fed against lefties. With Narvaez in place, he was a 259 hitter, 303 on base, 366 slug. The strikeouts were a little bit better against lefties than righties. The walks were a little bit higher. His WRC plus was 95, so he was nearly a league average hitter against lefties. You're going to see him start against all lefties at the beginning of this season. But then whenever you get Alvarez up, you see where Nido's skill set, becomes a little bit unneeded, because assuming he is coming up to catch and not just DH, Francisco Alvarez should conceivably get every start against left-handed pitching, and obviously would cut into Narvaez's time against righties as well. So the overall outlook for the catcher position for the Mets is they have two very capable, veteran, defensive-minded catchers in place. They have Alvarez waiting in the wings to grab that job, and I do think the runway is pretty open for him. As long as he has a good season, does what he's told, follows whatever instruction he gets, and has a nice start in Syracuse, you're going to see Francisco Alvarez sooner than later, and I think he has a chance to provide big impact. I don't know if he's going to reach his heights offensively this year, but he's going to be far better offensively than any catcher the Mets could put out there, and that's a way that this team can be a lot better from what they were last year without having to make another trade or make another signing. The prospects, to me, continue to be the place where this team is going to see great improvement this season. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show, at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for a second listen, check out Locked On MLB, hosted by Paul Francis Sullivan. Locked On MLB is where you want to go to learn about everything going on in the game today. Follow Locked On MLB on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts.